As VP Harris moves closer to locking up the Democratic nomination, she is also moving fast to choose her running mate. Our nightcap is still with us, and we have got to dig in. Kimberly, how important is this choice for her? I mean, when we look at the short list, there's a lot of strong names.
Yeah, I mean, she has the benefit of Democrats having a very, very deep bench to choose from when it comes to a running mate. I mean, we already know that she's looking for someone with strong executive experience, and that's why we have a list full of governors here. But they all have deep qualifications. But I think for her in particular, she knows what it's like to do that job, to be in an administration as a vice president to a president that had a good working relationship. So I think for her, this is far beyond just trying to have a good ticket in order to garner votes from a particular state. I think she's looking far ahead at somebody who can do the job, who can be a good partner and have the sort of relationship that she has with Joe Biden that has been so successful.
John, what qualities are most important? Is it age, race, gender, swing state policies? And it almost makes me cringe when I say age, gender, race, because isn't it bananas when we go through their names and then we say, could America go for 2 black people, 2 women, a woman and a gay guy? But sadly, that is where we are.
Yeah, let me start with the one quality that matters most, Stephanie, and it's winning. If, in fact, the country is, at risk of losing its democracy, losing its republic, as Kamala Harris has said, as Joe Biden said, as Hillary Clinton said in 2016, if that's the case, there is no justification for Kamala Harris to pick anybody on the basis of anything other than who it is that she and the closest people around her believe is the most likely to help her win. Typically, that's said as, kind of first do no harm, and we've seen on the Republican side with J.D. Vance already some harm being done to the Trump ticket. But I don't know who she's going to pick. To your point, most of the people that have been in the discussion are white men. There's some thought that there needs to be balance there. My personal view is that anybody that would vote against 2 black people on a ticket or 2 women on a ticket would also vote against 1 black person or one woman on a ticket. But I think she just needs to make an assessment, a critical assessment. Who's going to help me win? And that's the only thing that her party will stand for, and it is the only thing that is consistent with the message that democracy is at stake.
John, I often do not credit you with saying the most clever things, but that's a great point. If somebody is not going to vote for a ticket because there's 2 black people, then they're also not going to if there's 1. Good point.
Well,
all right, Eddie.
Even a blind
let's talk
squirrel
about
finds
another.
a nut every once in a while.
Well, I'm glad you did it on our show. All right, Eddie, we have got to talk about the other VP candidate, J.D. Vance. He is currently polling as the least liked VP nominee since 1980. Dan Quayle is feeling great tonight. What do you think about this?
Well, we know that J.D. Vance knows how to spell potato. At least we hope he does, right? So, I think it's a reflection of the nature of Vance's ascent. He's not qualified to be in this position. That's the first thing. And the second thing is that he has made his ascent by condescending in some ways to working class and working poor white people. When you read Hillbilly Elegy, it's condescending. It's an old argument, Stephanie, that we saw in the early 20th century, right, about so-called trailer park trash, blaming poor white people for their condition in interesting sorts of ways. And what's been so amazing is to see Tim Walz and Andy Beshear hand J.D. Vance his behind on the basis of that kind of argument. So I think Trump thought he could double down on his MAGA folk because he thought he had the election in the bag, and now he has to deal with what he has chosen.
Pete, do you think Vance was a mistake? If Donald Trump had chosen Nikki Haley or even an Elise Stefanik, it would be a whole different ballgame right now.
Yeah, I think it was a catastrophic mistake, and I think he showed that just two weeks. One thing is he's just an intensely dislikable person, and that doesn't help.
Exactly.
But there's also a combination of things. He's clearly a person of deep cynicism. I mean, that's the change from referring to Trump as America's Hitler to now being basically a bootlicker. Secondly, I think his convention speech, which was a real opportunity for him, he just fumbled. He was just not very effective. And of course, third are these deeply offensive comments about the women and couples who don't have children. So he's a hyper culture warrior, which we talked about earlier. I would bet my bottom dollar that Donald Trump regrets having put him on the ticket. I don't think that they can get rid of him at this point. You know, and John knows this better than anybody, vice presidents almost never affect the outcome of an election. LBJ was probably the last one who might have with Texas in 1960 for JFK. But it may be that J.D. Vance changes that in a negative way, especially if we're talking about, you know, 3 states, 250,000 votes total spread among those 3 states. Somebody like Vance, because of his radioactivity, is not somebody you want on the ticket. And I think because his was such a poor pick, that gives Vice President Harris the capacity to pick someone who's more quote unquote safe.
Then, Kimberly, given that this race is going to be decided not even in 6 states, but really in 3, does Vice President Harris need to hone in on a potential VP pick that has a lot of mojo in those states, Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania? I'm looking at you, Josh Shapiro.
Yeah, you know, I'm not sure. I think I agree with Pete that it is not the winning difference will be the vice presidential pick. All of the people who are being vetted right now are more than qualified to take this. And I don't think she has to you know, we can always be proven wrong, but it doesn't appear that she has anyone on her short list that can prove to be a losing difference. And I think that is true. I mean, I'm thinking about people who had effects on a presidential race, running mates. I would put Sarah Palin in that category, along with J.D. Vance. She doesn't want to pick someone like that, but I don't see anyone like that on the list. I don't think when it comes down to it that's the difference. I think now that Democrats have gotten over that crisis over Joe Biden, the things that are going to be driving it are issues and energy, you know, issues and momentum. And in those states, the issues, abortion rights, the economy, immigration, those things are going to be making the difference in this race. And if both Kamala Harris and her running mate can be effective messengers on that message, that's what's going to make the difference above all, and so long as the running mate doesn't do any harm.